Today I'm talking with Cassandra Jones. She's not the first woman I've met that has both AD and autism, but she's the first person we're interviewing on this podcast. We hope to do a deep dive today into how ADHD and autism impact a person's life.
Hi,
Sandra,
Cynthia.
welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
When were you diagnosed, and which of those two conditions were you diagnosed with first?
Great question. I was diagnosed about a year and a half ago. I was right at age 50, very late diagnosed. I was actually diagnosed with both at the same time, autistic and ADHD, the combined neurotype.
Did you do rating scales? Tell me how they diagnosed both at the same time.
When I started to suspect that I was autistic, I did not even have ADHD on my personal radar. In my research, I wanted to understand is how do I even go about getting a diagnosis? And I found very early that for females, getting diagnosed with autism is tricky. I wanted to find an organization that specialized in female autism diagnosis and, in particular, late diagnosed. I was able to locate someone. I live on the East Coast in Maine, and the resource that I found is in the Seattle area. They do this all remotely and very thoroughly. The process was very thorough. There were a number of different assessments, 6 or 7 of them, looking at the whole person, not just autism, but there are other neurotypes that tend to co occur. That's where the ADHD came into play. I did some questions on my own where I had to go back through my life and really think about myself, early years, throughout present time. I also had a couple of interviews with a trained neuropsychologist and a neuropsychiatrist, did the final
Oh,
evaluation. It was very thorough. My insurance did pay for the majority. I know that's not always the case. I was very fortunate to just have a copay. The organization that I worked with covers 42 states remotely.
could you tell us what was going on in your life at 50, or was it prior to 50 and you just were slow getting off the starting block to say, I got to go get diagnosed for this
Yeah.
autism?
Yeah, there were a lot of things going on. I always felt different. The ways that I describe it is the things that were easy for people, such as small talk or social interactions, things like that, were very difficult and very draining for me. But things that were harder for other people were the things that always seemed easier to me. Managing a really difficult problem or coming up with creative solutions and things like that. Those things came very easy to me. I always felt a little bit like an alien, is the best way I describe it. Just something was different. I had a very successful 25-year career in human resources at the executive level, leading large global teams around the world and coaching and solving very strategic problems for companies. But as I got older, and in particular once I hit 50, some of the things that I had been able to do for my whole life were getting harder and harder for me to manage. The rebound from an intense day of meetings would just really wipe me out, and that would compound over several days where I was just absolutely
Well,
exhausted.
we're hearing a lot now about how hormones are impacting women so
Yeah.
much with their ADHD. I'm wondering, is there any knowledge that it impacts those with autism as well?
Yes, unfortunately, the studies on female menopause and autism are so limited. Yes, absolutely. Others that I've talked to within my network experience the same, females going through menopause, but unfortunately, a lot more research needs to be done on this. It's a very unresearched area.
Okay, you were figuring out that you might have autism. It was because certain things were getting worse when you were 50. Were you surprised when your assessment also told you had ADHD?
Yeah, I really was when it wasn't even on my radar. Like I said earlier, I had read a lot about autism and autism in females and was checking off a lot of the boxes. That's why I thought, oh goodness, this sounds like me. But the ADHD piece was a surprise. But as I learned more about it, the complexity of my brain started to really make so much sense. I've done over the last year and a half a deep dive to really understand how this works and how it plays out for me. From a strengths perspective, there's a lot of strengths that surface for me and how I work and how I think. But there's also a lot of things that I need to be mindful of and how I can work better with my brain to not get into a burnout phase, for instance.
I think people looking at you and hearing you talk and knowing what you've achieved would be saying you're a pretty remarkable person. I'm wondering, were you diagnosed as gifted as a child? Were you brought up in any special way that benefited you, even without your diagnoses?
That's such a great question. I wasn't brought up in any special kind of way. As a young child, I was such a reader. I could absorb books very quickly. I read far and wide on any topic. And that growth mindset had just always been ingrained in how I think, but also how I get energy. Um,
Mhm.
what lights me up or what interests me is that insatiable curiosity, that curiosity with so many different things. That's what really shaped me. If I think back as a very young child, it was always wanting to have more information and then trying things out. I'm a very good masker. We often talk about masking in those with ADHD, but also very much so in those with
Yeah,
autism.
a double whammy of odd masking.
When I had my autistic assessment, they told me that I was a masker, meaning on the assessment, I scored 1 point lower than the highest point possible. Early on, I became a very good mimic, read of people. That probably is what led me to be in human resources, right? Very good read of people, read of situations, very observant, taking all of that information and helping that to apply to the situations that I was in, which also over years and years is not altogether healthy. It can be exhausting to do that.
The masking didn't seem like it was that harmful for you. It wore you out, but it didn't undermine your sense of self, it seems.
There was a lot of invisible things that were going on my whole life, really, to appear that I wasn't in sensory overload. For instance, becoming very good at keeping a calm demeanor when inside I might have been feeling very dysregulated and pushing myself too far at times. The other thing that finally came to a head for me was boundaries. There's something about being a high achiever and being very driven, which that's part of why I've been successful. Absolutely feel if there's something I set my mind to that I'm interested in and passionate about, I'm going to do whatever it takes to
You
get
set
there.
high standards for yourself and you are bound and determined to achieve them.
That's right. That worked for me for a very long time until it didn't. My health was getting troublesome. I had a lot of health problems that were combining and happening very rapidly. That's part of the downside of being good at showing up in a neurotypical
Uh,
way for so long. In talking with my doctor, I have a great doctor, but in talking with her or even friends, they said, "Oh, you're depressed," or "Oh, you're just
oh,
overwhelmed." None
uh-huh,
of those things felt like what I was. I didn't
I
feel
see.
depressed. I was excited about what I was
Hmm.
doing, energized by what I was doing, but just frustrated because I just couldn't keep it
Yeah,
up.
relate to eating lunch with a friend who I was really excited to see and afterwards feeling a letdown and not
Mm,
being able to put that together. You just think, why? I just had a nice time and now I'm feeling exhausted. So
yes.
other people who don't understand give you an explanation. It's not fitting. And yet you couldn't come up with one for yourself either.
those around me or doctors and therapists, they were well meaning, but they also don't know necessarily or educated on the signs to look for. I took it into my own hands to figure out what was going on and why I was feeling this way.
So are you saying that over those 50 years, you did think something was wrong and you went to see people for help?
I
And
did.
it was
Been diagnosed.
mostly persistence that you finally discovered that, was
Yes.
it through TikTok or where did the enlightenment come from?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting and very random. My last role in the company that I worked for was Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. We had an employee resource group, and there was a high proportion of individuals within that group that were neurodivergent. In listening to some of their experiences, I thought, this sounds like me.
Ah,
Um,
ah,
that's what started it, a very small kernel of information, which is often how my brain works. If I find something that's interesting and I spot patterns or things make sense that maybe others might not be paying attention to, listening to that, I thought, wow, this is very interesting and I want to learn more. That's when I just started doing a deep dive. What's fascinating about this as well is I have 3 children. Since I've been diagnosed, they've all gone through diagnosis as well and have various types of neurodivergence. What I hear often is it's the opposite, where
yes.
moms are finding out their children are neurodivergent or ADHD or autistic or what have you, and then they recognize the signs in themselves. For me, the situation played out in an opposite fashion.
In the ADHD community, there are a lot of people, even in England, that they need to self-diagnose because they can't get a professional diagnosis. They
Yeah.
sometimes wonder if it's worth getting a diagnosis. If you think you have it and you're not interested in medication, I don't know what the value is of going to get a diagnosis. I would think the same for autism. There's really no treatment. What was the benefit in seeking the diagnosis when you pretty much confirmed for yourself that you had it?
Yes. For me, I wanted that understanding and that confirmation. Growing up, knowing your brain is different, but not knowing why, it can really do a number on your confidence. It can do a number on things like imposter syndrome, which I have suffered at certain times. I wanted those answers. I was also fascinated as well. The other piece is, as I started to learn more about it, I thought, I think my kids might have various neurodivergences as well. I wanted to show up personally with more curiosity and look at this as a strength. I wanted to show up
Yeah.
that way for my kids as well. If I was going to ask them to go through a diagnosis, I wanted to do that first myself and make sure they saw me embracing this identity that's a part of who I am, setting that good example that this isn't necessarily something is wrong with you. I truly view it as a difference
Yes.
versus something that's wrong or
That needs to get fixed. Yeah. You're the second mother I've talked to where the mother got diagnosed and then the daughter did. She learned to talk with her daughter about it is that we're all different. We're all different in different ways. We like different food, we like different sports, and your brain likes some activities more than other activities. She felt, and like you're saying, that her own diagnosis made it easier for her daughter to accept the diagnosis and not be ashamed or I don't know what words to use.
That's right. At the age that I am, I do wonder if, with all of the stigma, especially around autism and ADHD as well, if I had been diagnosed much younger without the knowledge that's in place these days, right? In the 70s and 80s, would that have held me back? Would I have thought that I couldn't have achieved what I have achieved? I wouldn't have had the support that exists now.
Yes.
And that's a scary thought.
3 years ago, I interviewed 25 men that had inattentive type because they also were going undiagnosed. I was taken aback when one person, we expect when we say, do you wish you had been diagnosed sooner? They always would say yes. But he said no. He said it depended how they explained it to me. He was worried if he had been told sooner, it would have been treated as a total disability. It would have impacted his self concept in a negative way. we have made a lot of progress in that area of switching the language. And I personally give credit to the autism community for doing that. They've
Yeah.
really brought neurodivergence out of the closet. Those of us in the ADHD community are just trying to step up to that and claim it too.
Yeah, which I think is great. There's still a lot of work to be
Yes.
done from an awareness perspective.
Mhm.
I do find that there's a lot of progress and more to do.
I guess what we advocate for early diagnosis, but early diagnosis with the right language.
Yes. For me, a lot of it is around strengths and really understanding what you do well, capitalizing on that and leaning more into those things that come easier to you, being aware of the things that might be more difficult and how they interplay together. I'm an executive coach and neurodivergent life coach now. One of the things that I bring to my clients, if they're willing, is right away we do an emotional intelligence test. That's really to surface what their strengths are. An example, one that comes up with me personally when I personally taken the emotional intelligence EQI 2.0 myself, and I am lower in emotional expression. So I really think about what I want to say. And being in a fast paced corporate environment, those are the kinds of environments I've worked in, sometimes I might still have been processing something in a meeting that could have changed the direction of the dialogue or conversation, but I wasn't done processing it. And then I would have guilt later around, oh, I wish I would have said that or
Ah,
just said
uh-huh.
something in that meeting. But then the other way that helps me is you think about others that, might be more impulsive and to say the
Right,
first
right.
thing that comes to their mind
So you come
and
up,
come up with something more thoughtful. It's knowing that about myself. And then one of my daughters is the same way. So the thing there is to think about how do you navigate that in life and work? So if you're in the workplace, make sure to say something in the meeting or even after the meeting. I have a thought. It's not quite formulated yet, but I'm going to send an email around to everyone because I think
mhm,
it's important. Or making to advocate that there is an opportunity for everyone in the meeting to send any final thoughts. There's things that you can advocate for yourself around.
I think we're so often now leaving it up to the parents to figure out what their children's strengths are. And for me, as an adult, I read Strength Finders
Yes.
2.0. And when I found out that one of my strengths was ideation, it was just like, and it told me that's what I should bring to groups. It freed me up. I'm really into my ideas now, and people are saying you have such good ideas. It's just understanding about yourself and know that's your strength. So the other thing that comes to mind is this another ADHD coach with her son. She said he got the diagnosis, but it wasn't until he had neuropsych testing that we figured out how his brain worked. And so I'm wondering, have you had an experience where certain kind of testing really reveals, like the Strength Finder revealed to me, that we're not just relying on parents to notice, but we have ways to test where there's big strengths are.
Absolutely. Strength Finders is an excellent test. I've done that myself. I've done it. There's actually one for kids. There's a Strengths
Oh,
for Kids, but I did that test with my kids before I knew they were diagnosed because I had done it with my teams. I'd done Strength Finders with my
yeah.
teams in corporate and the folks that I led. And so I did it with my kids and my daughter in particular, my oldest daughter. She loves animals, a lot of deep dives and special interests around animals throughout her life. But she also displayed quite an aptitude for that sense of justice and community involvement or making a difference. And when she was quite small, I had found an organization that rescued dogs and
Uh-huh.
she loved dogs. And we didn't have a dog, and we weren't in a place to have a dog at the time, and she wanted one. And with this organization, they trained the kids to be assigned to a dog at an adoption event, and they would read all about the dog and the
Uh,
traits of the dogs and the breed of the dog. And then those that wanted to adopt the animals would come around and learn about the dog. And so she
okay.
was little, would have this opportunity. She was probably about 10, but
Uh,
the opportunity to help get this dog adopted. And I think, that for her, we still talk about that and that she was involved with that
yeah.
organization. It was a great program, but it was an opportunity to take, and this again, she wasn't diagnosed or anything at that point in time, but just the point of strengths and finding ways for your kids to creatively tap into those things that they're naturally drawn to.
What I've heard is that pediatricians screen for autism in 2-year-olds, that almost that's part of good practice, and that those kinds of behaviors, the stimming and the rocking, whatever, that are showing up at that time. Do you recall that for yourself or for your children?
Not necessarily for myself at that age, certainly with my kids. As I look back, I think there were some signs there with sensitivity to certain clothes or fabrics or wanting to not feel constrained. One of my daughters at a very young age did a lot of hair twirling. Even or rubbing of her
Yeah.
hair, her
Uh-huh.
ear, which now, as I'm learning, especially in girls, is a quiet form of
Uh-huh.
stimming. So there were certainly some signs there.
So
And then
I've had an epiphany right in this conversation because my older brother, when we were growing up, and I was one of 4 children, he would get, back then we had beds with springs on them. Brother would kneel on the bed and bounce and bounce and bounce. And now I realize that was probably a form of stimming for him. But
wow.
what I wanted to say beyond that is what I've heard, and I don't know if you've observed this, is I feel like I have some autistic tendencies because
Mm,
there's certain things in my life I have no problem that it's routine. My exercise program, great, it's routine. It's easier for me to remember. Eating the same thing every morning, great, it's a routine. It makes my ADHD life easier to have those things. The justice piece, yes, I would get upset. And sometimes I get upset if people don't word thing correctly, they don't use the right word, or they don't punctuate correctly. But I don't feel like I have the whole shebang of autism. And that is what I've been hearing is that for some women, we have ADHD, the inattentive type, and we might have a smattering of autistic symptoms. Is that a common thing you're finding, or how would you relate to that? I guess
well,
it's like some people say I'm autistic with ADHD, or I'm ADHD with some autism. You're more one and got some of the other, or you're more the other and you got some of the missing.
ab- absolutely. Some of what you were saying definitely resonates with me in terms of, I would say, how it feels like, what it feels like to be both autistic and ADHD. Before I talk about that, a stat that I've seen though is that to your point, the autism and ADHD combined type is probably more common than we know, right? And 50 to 70% is the last stat that I saw among autistic women that also have
Huh.
ADHD. So it does co-occur quite frequently to have both if you're autistic. But for me, what it feels like, I was just reflecting on what you said about you feel one way and the other way too. So for me, it's almost like I would describe it as having a high-powered like operating system in your head, but they have completely different rules. One part of your operating system or my operating system really craves stimulation and spontaneity and like quick pivots. I like change. I like fast pace. I like lots of things going on. But then the other side of me also likes routine, clarity, I don't like surprises. So it's a little bit like they're at war with each other at times. And that's also why I always felt very different, or like something is different and I can't quite explain it to people. But while they're not always necessarily in sync, I value both sides of I just think of it as my brain, two sides of my
Uh-huh.
brain. And I just have to, I've learned now to recognize what's going on and to embrace that. So the fact that my part of me might want to chase a brand new idea at midnight that just came to me, right? The practical side of me will say, yeah, but you're going to
Ah,
panic if your sleep routine is off, so you can't do that until the morning.
yeah.
So it's something.
Understand. It's just amazing how that understanding gives you the power to almost control yourself better. And
Yes.
one part of your brain can counsel the other part of your brain that this is not a good idea right now.
It's almost the vision of the angel and the
Yes.
devil on your shoulders, and they both interchange, sometimes
Oh,
holding myself back, right?
yes.
So sometimes the autistic side of myself might be, ooh, this is
Scary.
scary, right? But then the other side is saying, but you can do this. You've got these great ideas. They work in
Result,
tandem.
you go resort to making a list to figure it out, or which voice gets to be more powerful?
It really depends on the situation. It really does depend on the situation. Where have I gotten myself in a state of burnout or probably overcommitted myself? This being a high achiever and learner and well, constantly excited to learn new things or jump into a new project. I've learned to be more thoughtful now and to pause and say no.
So
Yeah.
you're saying you reflected on some of your experiences, and that reflection helps you move forward.
It really does, and in a much more thoughtful way. Before, I often would just think I had to do everything. Some of that comes from being undiagnosed and having some of that imposter syndrome, thinking I constantly have to
Yes.
prove
Uh-huh.
myself. Know those things now and what's going on. I'm much more thoughtful, knowing that, okay, what's happening here is my impulsive side, getting excited, wanting to jump forward, and also that imposter syndrome that gets mixed in. I can take a step back and say, is this something that I really am interested in? Is this something that's good
Yes.
for me? Those sorts of things. I'm
I
learning.
mean, everyone is told not to press send right away when you write an email, but a woman counseled me that when I have ideas, I should put it in a folder and sit on it for 24 hours. Even with children, we're told when they have these ideas that are far off the wall, it's okay. Be excited with them about it. Act like it's going to happen. Maybe the next day they've forgotten about it. But if they haven't forgotten about it, it's something they're really interested in.
Absolutely. If it still excites you the next
Yes.
morning and it's still something that you think this is great to do.
But do you have any words of wisdom for women out there who think they might have ADHD, or parents who are wondering if their daughter does?
If your daughter shows some of the traits that we've talked about, there's definitely value in having a diagnosis. If you notice consistent internal overwhelm or perfectionism or sensory aversions or even masking to blend in, it's worth exploring with a professional. Early awareness and support doesn't mean something is wrong with her, but could allow your daughter to develop understanding about herself earlier on, which could be beneficial as she grows and develops.
And I could bring up here that at the website for Find the ADHD Girls, we have a questionnaire developed specifically for 7-year-olds about whether they might show signs of ADHD. But a lot of the questions cover sensory issues, they cover the perfectionism, the anxiety. If you do that checklist and you have a lot of checks, that's the time to bring your child to the pediatrician.
That's great.
It's just really fun to talk to you. I must have some concepts of what someone with autism is like and what someone with ADHD is like. And if they didn't know about this diagnosis, they wouldn't be like you.
Oh, Yeah, it is a fascinating thing. I'm learning more every day, but there's so much more to learn
I
on.
like it's such a positive experience. And for most people, initially there's a lot of grieving, there's a lot of emotional turmoil of why didn't I know sooner, reassessment of their lives. Maybe because you've had therapy along the way. The women I talk to that have therapy seem so much better put together. Even though they didn't know about their ADHD, they didn't know
Yeah,
about their diagnosis, therapy just helped them. They're much
yeah,
more self-accepting.
yeah.
Whatever comes their way, they're self-accepting. Maybe you've done some of that work earlier in your life and it's not baggage for you now.
Yeah, I'm a very reflective person. I'm so interested in how the brain
Ah,
works
uh-huh.
and the strengths-based piece.
Take it with a lot of judgment.
I'm hopeful that the work I'm doing now, speaking about it and training about it, going into companies and coaching, I'm hopeful that more people are getting more comfortable disclosing their
Yes.
neurodivergence because a lot of people aren't comfortable disclosing at work and getting the supports they need. I'm hoping there's more support in the workplace or even in life, just being comfortable saying, hey, my brain's different.
When I interviewed a younger person and she said, I'm actually happy to be different. It was
Right.
wonderful.
Yes, I
You
love
don't want
that.
to be like everyone else. That was so great to think that
Yes.
people could get to that point where they're happy to be different.
I love that so much. When I reflect on the things in my life where I have been successful or in a performance review where a manager said, this is what you do really well, those things I can directly correlate back to my autism or ADHD. The things that I do well wouldn't change because those are the things that have allowed me to
Yes.
be successful and really leaning into that for girls in particular if we can learn early on the ways in our brains, the strengths that we have, and can lean into those, that helps us so much.
I've heard that the men who have ADHD are the ones more likely saying it's a superpower or it's been great. And some of us women are thinking that's because you've gotten the support. You've gotten
Yes,
your secretary or you've gotten your wife who helps
yes,
you achieve things in life. Women that don't get diagnosed don't seem to get that level of support. I never call it a superpower. I say that there are strengths to it, and you
yeah.
have to work to make those strengths be there for you.
Absolutely working with your brain versus against it. One of the things that I've learned recently, and this is stronger on my ADHD side, is our brains are wired to react to the things that are urgent, but
Mm.
not necessarily the things that are important. Important is really more of a neurotypical response, knowing that not beating myself up when I know something is important and I just can't get going with it.
Ah,
Now I know, oh, I'm motivated when it's urgent and I'm going to do my best work. When it's truly urgent, then I can hone in and focus and deep dive and get something done. But I would beat myself up for years about that. This is important. Why
oh,
can't I get going with
oh.
it? As girls learn about how their brain works, it does give you more grace with yourself to not feel as bad about how you react to things.
When I used to go to yoga class, you'd look around at other people who could bend further. And I learned that their bodies are put together different ways. Some people can do certain positions more easily than other people. And who knew your body was that different? But the same with your brain. You can't expect it to do things it's not well built for. And might as well
Absolutely.
go with the things that it's built for.
Absolutely. One of the tricks I've learned is now that I know this urgent versus important, if I have something important coming up, but it's not urgent yet, it's a week or two out, then I make sure the day before to mark my calendar and hold that time. I know I'm going to be motivated with the urgent versus, oh goodness, I've got all these meetings on my calendar and it's urgent and I'm going to have to really push through. I don't do that anymore. I organize myself better.
We believe all girls with ADHD should get a fair start in life by getting diagnosed by age 8. Visit us at www.findtheadhdgirls.org. Thank you.